Well, hello. My name is Monica Valdes, and I'm honored to be here at the South Art screening of Stateless. Thank you to the Southern Circuit Tour of Independent Filmmakers for inviting me to be here today. A little bit about myself. I, I am the founder of the DocMiami International Film Festival and the Florida Documentary Film Festival series. I have over 25 years experience in the film festival industry and 20 years experience in the field of education with a background in history and film. Michle Stephenson, as co-founder member of the Rada Film Group, filmmaker, artist, and author Michèle Stephenson draws from her Panamanian and Haitian roots and international experience as a human rights attorney to tell provocative stories in a variety of media that speak to personal and systemic liberation. Her work has appeared on numerous broadcast and web platforms, including PBS, Showtime, and MTV. Her most recent film, American Promise, was nominated for 3 Emmys, including Best Documentary and Outstanding Coverage of a Current News Story. The film also won the jury prize at Sundance and was selected for the New York Film Festival's main state slate program. Stephenson was recently awarded the Creative Capital Fellowship and the Anonymous Was a Woman Award, as well as the inaugural Chicken and Egg Pictures Breakthrough Filmmaker Award. She is also a 2016 Guggenheim Fellow. Her community engagement accomplishments include the Puma BritDoc Impact Award for the film with the greatest impact on society and a Revere Award nomination from the Association of American Publishers, and she is a fellow of the Skoll Stories of Change initiative. Her recent book, Promises Kept, written with co-authors Joe Brewster and Hillary Beard, won an NAACP Image Award for outstanding literary work. With this said, thank you, Michelle, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, I viewed your film. It really is a beautiful work of art. Congratulations on this incredible accomplishment. I do have a lot of questions in mind, especially with my background in history in particular. So my first question really has to do with this. Article 15 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that all people have a right to nationality, that we all have a right to belong to a country. The title of your film is Stateless. Can you explain this choice of words?
Well, Stateless really describes the condition that over 200,000 Dominicans of Haitian descent find themselves in, as well as other communities across the globe. And what it means, if referring to the Declaration of Human Rights, is the idea that we all have a right to the attachment of the land to which we belong. In some countries, it is through blood that we connect to the specific nationality or citizenship. In other countries, as in most parts of the Americas, because of how we were colonized, if you're born here, for the most part, whether it's in the United States and it is part of the Constitution of the Dominican Republic, you have a right to the citizenship of that country where you're born in. You become stateless when that is no longer a possibility, right? Where you have no birth certificate, legitimate birth certificate to which that allows you to claim your nationality or citizenship. And in the case of the Dominican Republic, it was an outright sort of violation of international human rights. Dominicans of Haitian descent who thought they had a constitutional right to the birth certificate that they actually had in their hands from birth, from one day to the next in 2013 to the Constitutional Court of the Dominican Republic, they rendered those birth certificates illegitimate, null and void. It's just imagine that you wake up here in the United States, there is a federal ruling, or not a federal ruling, Supreme Court rules, you know what, those birth certificates you had, they're no longer legitimate and we're gonna make it retroactive to, in the case of the Dominican Republic in 1929, when the border between Haiti and Dominican Republic was made official. And so, those pieces of paper are as good as they are for the garbage, essentially. And so the consequence of that, and that's what statelessness means. It's really the idea of being attached to a particular nation and not having any attachment and therefore being invisible. So what does that mean, this invisibility? This sort of bureaucratic invisibility means you can't go to school, you can't benefit from government services that you often have paid taxes to, you can't buy a telephone, you can't go to school. There's so many things that really rely upon that particular government sanctioned identity that is provided to you since birth.
Right. In your film, there was this indication that immigration in Haiti increased the crime rate. Have you seen any reliable data that indicates that Haitian immigration to the Dominican Republic increases crime or is a danger to the Dominican Republic in any way?
Oh, no, I have not come across any of that. I mean, this is part of the whole propaganda and propaganda discourse that the ultranationalist right wing promulgates, not just in the Dominican Republic, but we hear it here in the United States as well, in terms of how people are categorized, immigrants, mostly immigrants of color from the rest of the Americas, are categorized, and we know that there are no statistics that bear that assumption. And with regards to the Dominican Republic, yes, the crime rate is relatively high if we look at it in comparison to other places in the Americas, but it's across the board in terms of who commits those crimes.
So do you believe then it's a combination of misinformation that is propaganda on purpose and other forms of misinformation which are fueling the fear of immigration on the island?
Yes, I mean, that's sort of a polite way to say of putting it in terms of misinformation. I think in some cases we see through social media and other platforms that there is actually an intentional sort of disinformation that is happening, that is part, again, of an agenda to one, push back migrants and immigrants, and specifically in Dominican Republic, but also to support the denationalization of Dominicans of Haitian descent. So I think it's part of a larger strategy that unfortunately social media is not rendered accountable to. And in some cases, what we find with ultra right-wing movements is very often they're connected to a specific and have the funding to push this propaganda through their own news media networks, right? Whether it be newspaper or radio. You see in Stateless, there are sort of radio accounts and discussions that that people have access to, those airwaves that sort of perpetuate the stereotype, and people internalize and they bring outside in their interactions with these targeted communities.
Right, thank you. It seemed like the issue is complex, that there are various factors that are feeding into this. So my next question really is this a conflict about a fear of immigrants, or is it more an issue of racism, in your view?
Well, in the case of the Dominican Republic, it's very much, I mean, the two, you cannot separate the two in some ways, even if you look at here in the United States or other places in the Americas. I like to make the connection because for me, this film is not only a window into the specificity of what's going on the island, but it's also a mirror in terms of reflecting a lot of the same patterns that are happening here. And for me, the issue of Black migration, of migration of other people of color, darker skinned people of color from dominant white culture, the way that that is treated across the board, across our hemisphere, we see the same patterns. So the two intersect. And in the case of the Dominican Republic, there's a specific anti-Haitian attitude that that is the expression of this deep anti-Blackness. Now, how I would complicate that is understanding that it's part of sort of this larger sort of capitalist system that uses race to keep certain communities not only marginalized, but disempowered, so they become a labor force that is really easy to exploit. And so what you see are, in the case of the island, that even elites across the border sort of are connected in terms of how this exploitation work and this cycle of discrimination happens. So there's a deep anchoring of how white supremacy sort of manifests itself. I like to think of the island as the birthplace, really, of our racial caste system across the hemisphere. I mean, it's where Christopher Columbus landed. He didn't land in the United States. He landed on Hispaniola, he and family members and the Europeans. It's the first place where, you know, peoples of African descent arrived by force. It's the first place where we really see the large-scale genocide of indigenous populations, and, you know, the installation of a system of colorism and pigmentocracy that sort of, you know, sees its various, you know, iterations here in the United States through Jim Crow, the one drop rule, and you see sort of the opposite of that in other places across the Americas, and sort of the DR and Haiti are sort of another expression of that. And so we have not come to terms with that violent legacy. And so it takes different shapes, whether it's through people like Gladys Feliz in our film, and her attitudes, where in some cases people would see her as a Black woman, in other places, no, she looks towards how can I differentiate myself as much as possible so I can be upwardly mobile and gain access and foothold into a modernist, more European sort of standard of worldview of looking at the world.
Yes, I think that was really important that there was this element of colorism. Sometimes it's not really brought up in minority communities. I'm of Cuban descent, and I can tell you it is a very real thing in the Cuban community, and sadly elsewhere.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I grew up, whether it's from my Panamanian, sometimes even my Haitian side, I would hear the, you know, the whole, you know, mejorar la raza. You know, how do you better the race?
Yeah.
You better the race by, you know, thinking about how to not only appear more white, but how to marry more white, or how to be involved in a more white. So it's kind of this opposite side of the coin from the one drop rule here in the United States. One drop of Black blood, you're considered Black. In much of the Americas, at least the very personal experience I've had, as well as some of the research I've done, it's the opposite. It's, you know, whatever drop of whiteness that you can claim, you claim it and try to, you know, better your family conditions through that. And it all plays into that system. And we don't talk about it. I agree. We really don't talk about it enough. It's very, yeah, it's, yeah.
And with fear of immigrants on the table there, and racism and colorism, how does corruption on the island add to this conflict?
Oh, wow. That's a big one. Yeah, and we see it now even on both sides of the island. It's like, how do you remedy the corruption? It's, again, you know, part of this larger system of, you know, of exploitation. And when you have nothing, how can you, you know, how do you put food on the table? What can you do to put food on the table? And, you know, at all these different levels, you know, people can be bought. It's really a deeply anchored thing, but, you know, I like to think, you know, it's not just exclusive, you know, to the island. We suffer from a lot of those elements here as well. But it's, you know, how all of these things sort of intersect to create sort of this perfect storm of keeping a racial caste system alive. And, you know, Rosa Iris was really battling with that, but it was really, you know, it was a battle that would be very hard to shift. And, you know, politics is dirty.
Yeah.
So,
Since your film was completed, there have been some serious developments in Haiti, in particular the assassination of Haitian President Jovenel Moise. How do you feel this event adds to the narrative of your film? Does it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's the assassination itself. I think it's very easy for us to fall into the tropes, right, of stereotype around Haiti, that we really, and I feel that this is what we try to counter that in the narrative of, in our film in Stateless, building these counter narratives that even someone like Teofilo in the film sort of represents, looking at Haiti as a beacon of resistance to global capitalism and the price that it has had to pay up to this day. So if anything, I hope that the narrative that Stateless brings in helps us complicate how we see Haiti, how we see the island, how we even see the Dominican Republic as well, in a better understanding and really trying to avoid slipping into these stereotypes about Haiti, Haitian politics and government, that it's part of a much larger system of which it's only a pawn, and that we really need to take the time to unpack that reality and the complexity. And with the earthquake, um, the big question is, how do we not repeat, the big mistakes that were made back in 2010? And if anything, I just hope that, Stateless becomes part of a larger narrative that it gives us a greater understanding of the complexity of what's going on the island.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. In this point in history, why do you feel that this story was an important one to tell right at this moment?
Well, the film is 5 years in the making, so not intentionally. So, between the fundraising, but you think, what I realized as a filmmaker in the films I make, every film has its its journey, right? And its birth, and comes at the time that it needs to come. There was a lot of grappling, our film was, released virtually back in 2020, but it really gained momentum. I have to say that, with the murder of George Floyd, with the uprisings, the anti-racist uprisings that took place in 2020, really helped build momentum for this film and give it a space where we are in a different place around these conversations around anti-Blackness and white supremacy and how it plays out in all of our communities. And I feel that in some ways, this has been an opportunity. The timing has been an opportunity for this film. It's fallen on a space that where we're all sort of opening our eyes in a much more complicated way, and the film is being embraced in that way that I think would not have been the case before the death of George Floyd. In some ways, he's been sort of this sacrificial lamb that is forcing us to relook at our relationships. And Stateless, with the year that we spent building momentum virtually, 2021 is in fact a really sort of important and significant time for the film to come out. We're receiving it differently, with this new discourse. And for me, it's really part of this larger movement globally, where we're looking at, the Bolsonaros in Brazil, the Trump and GOPs of the United States, the right-wing movements in Europe and beyond, in India as well, and seeing the interconnections. But the flip side of that, understanding, I hope that Stateless is part of a larger, contribution to understanding that the resistance is also global, right? That there are thousands of Rosa Irises, Black women like Rosa Iris, working not only in the Dominican Republic, but on a global scale in other places, who kind of find sort of nurturing and reinforcement by seeing and sharing other stories and seeing the stories of Rosa Iris in this larger battle that we're in.
Right. I think in recent years, it's been a very strange evolution of a lack of faith in diplomacy. So along those lines, what, if anything, do you feel could improve the dialogue between the opposing groups in the Dominican Republic with regard to this issue?
Yeah, and there are different levels of things that are going on right now, and that would be wonderful to encourage and support and push. One is the intercultural collaborations that are happening. I think that the young Dominicans, young Afro-Dominicans whose roots go, not necessarily through Haiti, but to, the history of and slavery in the Dominican Republic, are really burgeoning movements of collaboration, pushing back against the stereotypes around Haitians and Dominicans of Haitian descent. And this is happening in the cultural sphere. There are musical, film collaborations around music, collaborations around writing and books as well, that we see. One of the organizations called Aswei composed this music that is at the end of our film, called La Otra Cara. which it tells the history, the common history of the island. So there are things happening that we need to sort of give light to and support that are going on the ground. And I have a lot of faith and am very much inspired by the youth movements happening in the DR now. The flip side of that I think is really important to see, we've partnered with an organization called Incultured Company. They're really part of the diaspora, the Dominican and Haitian diaspora. They work together, but they're also working in the DR as well. But they come from this school of conflict resolution, and really understanding the core of this, that we can't really have substantive in-depth dialogue between communities until we share a common knowledge, and you will understand this as a historian, of our history. So right now, there are very different narratives of how these nations were built and what were the historical circumstances between these two nations. And we have to come to a common understanding of this, of history of the island, in order to really foster greater collaboration. And Incultured Company, they actually engage in workshops where they, between the two communities, that start with the history. Like, start with, can we really start and figure out how did colonization happen on these two sides of the island? Where did collaboration and tension happen? But what is it that we need to kind of not reimagine, but relook at, to have a better understanding? Yeah, that there was collaboration that happened, right? That there were things that we're not privy to, that was much less tension filled than we are told. So really, starting with our common history is a good place to start, because there was, under Trujillo, a very intentional mythologizing of the history of Haiti's impact on the DR that made Haitians the boogeyman that we need to counter, that, and happens as early as in schools.
Right, thank you. And what could bring about at this moment the most positive change for those who are presently stateless in the Dominican Republic?
Well, there are a couple of things. There is a legal defense fund. There are lawyers fighting and working on behalf of Dominicans of Haitian descent, looking at ways, because the government did provide very specific relief for those whose citizenship was stripped. It's not 100% citizenship again, but it is a way for at least people to start working again or being able to go to school. And there are lawyers working on behalf of that. And there's a legal defense fund that I would be happy to share that information through the South Arts later, in terms of access to their GoFundMe. So there are people working on getting some legitimate papers so people could start working. But I do think that there's also further international pressure that we can provide. I mean, the first 6 months after this decision came down, there was huge international pressure that led to the Dominican government providing this sort of like temporary relief that we see Rosaides trying to work on with her clients. But being able to talk about it more, to talk about it to individual in our communities, about the statelessness issue and the racism that's taking place. But whatever type of sort of international pressure that we can forge and reignite would be good. And Stateless, we're looking at ways of having screenings, in different UN and international platforms to sort of reignite the, because right now there is a wall being built. The current president has started building a wall between Haiti and the DR. So this is, an international sort of, again, an international outrage that we're not hearing much about, with everything else that's going on. And, in the pandemic, our stateless brothers and sisters in their communities have not had access to vaccines, in the same way, because they don't have papers to provide, to allow the access. So there's many things that we can work on these different scales in terms of what we have access to as individuals.
Well, thank you so much. My final question, as you continue to screen Stateless, what projects do you have planned next?
Well, I have a number of projects that are kind of in the works. Interesting enough, I have a 30-minute short that's also come out of the work with Stateless, which is one of the participants we spent time with. Her name is Elena Lorac, who did actually get her papers. So that film is being distributed through festivals right now and will be on Vice next month, and was also on PBS. So it's a further sort of deep dive into the stories that exist around statelessness in the DR. And the film is called Elena. And so that's doing the circuit right now, and very happy and proud of it. We recently won the Best Short Film Award at Black Star Film Festival. So people can look out for that through our website, radastudio.org. And a couple of other films in the making. I have a couple of other things I'm thinking about around the Haitian Revolution, as well as one film dealing with actually my own personal ancestry related to my Panamanian grandmother and how she ended up in Haiti. And it's a story, it's a feminist story of survival through the Caribbean and through the eyes of my grandmother's journey. So
I'm looking forward to seeing more of your work.
thank you so much.
In closing, I hope you all have enjoyed our discussion of Stateless today. Thank you, Michèle, for sharing your film with us and for the amazing work that you do. Documentary films are the oral history of our time. So thank you, Michèle, for adding to our global oral history heritage. And for all the independent documentary filmmakers out there, keep creating and sharing your stories. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Michèle.
Thank you so much. Thank you.